More disturbing true dead of night stories, the graveyard shift. Detective Rachel Morrison had seen her share of disturbing crime scenes during her 15 years with the Portland Police Department, but nothing prepared her for the case that began at 3:17 a.m. on a freezing November night. The call came through dispatches of possible breaking and entering at Rosewood Cemetery, the oldest burial ground in the city, established in 1851. Probably just teenagers, her partner, Detective James Chen, muttered as they pulled up to the cemetery gates. Halloween was last week. Kids always think it's funny to mess around in graveyards. But Rachel felt something different as they approached. The air around the cemetery seemed thicker somehow, pressing against her skin like an invisible weight. The street lights along the perimeter flickered erratically, and a fog had rolled in that shouldn't have been there. The weather forecast had called for clear, cold conditions. The cemetery gates stood open, the heavy iron bars pushed wide despite the chain and padlock that should have secured them. The chain lay on the ground, unbroken, the lock still fastened shut. "How the hell?" James began, crouching to examine the lock with his flashlight. "It's still locked," Rachel observed, her breath misting in the frigid air. "But the gates are open." They exchanged a glance. James radioed their position, and they entered the cemetery, hands instinctively moving to their service weapons. The beam from Rachel's flashlight cut through the fog, illuminating weathered headstones and marble monuments that seemed to lean toward them as they passed. The groundskeeper, Martin Hayes, had made the call. They found him near the center of the cemetery, standing beside an open grave, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. He was 63 years old, had worked at Rosewood for 37 years, and Rachel had never seen anyone look so utterly broken. "Mr. Hayes," Rachel called out gently, "we're here. You're safe now." Martin turned to face them, and Rachel saw his hands trembling uncontrollably. "No," he whispered. "None of us are safe. Not anymore. Not after what I saw." "Why don't you tell us what happened?" James said, his tone professional but kind. Martin pointed a shaking finger at the open grave. "I do my rounds every night. Same route, same time. 3 a.m. I check the southern section. I've done it for 37 years without incident. But tonight I found this." Rachel approached the grave carefully. The headstone read, "Elizabeth Ashford, 1847 to 1871, beloved daughter, may she rest in eternal peace." The grave had been excavated from the inside. The dirt was pushed outward, scattered across the surrounding grass in a pattern that couldn't be explained by any external force. But more disturbing was what lay beside the hole. The casket, a remarkably preserved wooden box from the 1870s, with its lid lying several feet away. Empty. "Could be grave robbers," James suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Looking for what?" Rachel counted. Jewelry from 1871, in a cemetery with hundreds of newer graves with better targets. She turned to Martin. "You said you saw something. What did you see?" Martin's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I saw her. Elizabeth Ashford. She was standing right where you are now. Detective. She was wearing a white burial gown, covered in dirt, and her eyes." He choked back a sob. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them, just empty sockets filled with darkness. And she was looking at me. "Mr. Hayes, I know this is frightening," James began. "She spoke to me." Martin interrupted, his voice rising. She said, "They're waking up. All of them. The dead of night is coming, and the living will know what it means to be forgotten in the ground." Then she walked toward the old section, toward the grave from the 1800s, and she sank into the earth, just dissolved into the ground like water. Rachel felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She'd dealt with mentally ill witnesses before, people whose trauma made them see things that weren't there. But Martin Hayes was a rational man, a veteran groundskeeper who'd probably seen his share of strange things over the years and never once called the police. "We need to check the old section," she said quietly. James looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Rachel, come on. There's a rational explanation for all this. Someone dug up the grave, maybe using the coffin for some sick ritual or prank. Mr. Hayes got spooked and his mind filled in the blanks." "Then explain the locked gate that's somehow open," Rachel challenged. "Explain the excavation pattern. Humor me, James." They left Martin at the entrance with instructions to wait for backup, then made their way deeper into Rosewood Cemetery, toward the oldest section where graves from the 1840s and 1850s lay beneath ancient oak trees. The fog grew thicker with each step, and Rachel noticed something that made her blood run cold. Footprints in the frost-covered grass. Bare feet, leading from Elizabeth Ashford's grave toward the old section. James saw them too. His hand moved to his weapon. "Okay, that's not normal." They followed the footprints through rows of crumbling headstones, many so weathered that the names were no longer legible. The prints led them to a section where the graves were packed close together, a testament to an era when Rosewood had been the only cemetery serving a rapidly growing city. And there, they found the second open grave, then the third, then the fourth. 12 graves in total, all excavated from the inside, all empty, all with burial dates between 1847 and 1873. The coffins lay scattered around the area, their lids torn off from within, splintered with suggesting desperate, violent force. "This is impossible," James breathed. "Rachel, this is impossible." Rachel's mind raced through explanations. Mass grave robbery? But who would target such old graves, and how would they stage it to look like internal excavation? Some kind of elaborate prank? But the sheer amount of work involved, the precision of the locations. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any cemetery, living or dead. Singing. A woman's voice, clear and haunting, carrying through the fog. The melody was old, colonial era, the kind of song that might have been sung at funerals 2 centuries ago. And it was coming from multiple directions, surrounding them. "We need to leave," Rachel said, her professional composure cracking. "Now!" They turned to head back toward the entrance, but the fog had grown so dense they could barely see 5 feet ahead. The singing grew louder, and now Rachel could make out words. "Remember us, the buried ones, forgotten beneath the earth, the dead of night we become, given our second birth." Figures emerged from the fog. They were dressed in burial clothes from the Victorian era, white gowns, dark suits, clothing that should have rotted away decades ago. Their skin was gray, dirt-covered, and their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. But their eyes, those empty, hollow sockets, fixed on Rachel and James with unmistakable awareness. "Rachel," James whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Tell me you're seeing this too." "I see it," she managed, her hand gripping her weapon, though she knew bullets wouldn't help. The figures didn't attack. They simply stood there, watching, as more emerged from the fog. 12 in total. 12 bodies from 12 graves. One stepped forward, a woman in a white burial gown, dirt clinging to her hair. Elizabeth Ashford. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the cemetery like a chorus. "You build your cities on our bones. You forget our names. You let our stones crumble and our memories fade. But we remember. We always remember. And when the dead of night comes, when the veil is thinnest, we return to remind you. We were people. We had lives. We had loves. We deserve to be remembered." Rachel found her voice, though it shook. "We do remember. We maintain this cemetery. We preserve the history." "Lies," Elizabeth's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This place is forgotten. Tourists visit the new monuments, the famous graves. But us? The original residents. We're overgrown, crumbling, erased. So we rise, to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. What do you want? Rachel asked. The figure stood silent for a long moment. Then Elizabeth spoke again, and this time her voice held something that might have been sadness. Tell them we were here. Tell them our names. Let the living know that the dead were once alive, once mattered, once loved and were loved. Do this, and we will sleep again. Forget us, and we will rise every dead of night until someone finally remembers. The fog began to dissipate. The figures faded with it, dissolving like smoke until Rachel and James stood alone in the old section of the cemetery, surrounded by open graves and empty coffins. When backup arrived 15 minutes later, they found Rachel and James sitting on a stone bench, staring at the excavated graves. The other officers searched the entire cemetery but found nothing. No bodies, no intruders, no evidence of anyone else being present. The official report classified the incident as vandalism, the work of unknown perpetrators who'd somehow removed the body for reasons unclear. The graves were refilled, the coffin disposed of, and Rosewood Cemetery was closed for 2 weeks for security improvements. But Rachel couldn't let it go. She spent every free moment researching the names on those 12 headstones. She discovered their stories. Elizabeth Ashford, a teacher who died of tuberculosis at 24. Jonathan Wright, a freed slave who'd fought in the Civil War and died protecting his family from a mob. Sarah Chen, one of Portland's first Chinese immigrants, who'd built a successful business despite rampant discrimination. 12 people with 12 remarkable lives, all buried and forgotten. Rachel wrote their stories. She published them in the local newspaper, created a website dedicated to preserving their memories, and started a fundraising campaign to restore the old section of Rosewood Cemetery. Within 6 months, volunteers had cleaned the graves, repaired the headstones, and created a memorial garden honoring the cemetery's earliest residents. The graves never opened again, but Rachel visits Rosewood every week, walking among the old headstones, reading the names aloud, making sure they are not forgotten. Because she knows the truth now, that the dead aren't demanding fear or worship. They simply want what every living person wants. To be remembered, to matter, to have their existence acknowledged before time erases them completely. And on certain nights, when the fog rolls in and the cemetery grows quiet, Rachel swears she can hear singing. Not the haunting melody from that November night, but something gentler. A lullaby, perhaps, or a hymn of peace. The dead are sleeping again, but Rachel knows they are watching, waiting to see if the living will keep their promise. Because the dead of night always returns, and the forgotten always remember.